Hi, I'm Rowan from H.G. Walter. We're London-based butchers dealing with whole carcass butchery, and welcome to our series of butchery demonstrations. Coming underneath the blade bone, face up the ends, rake the tip of the knife against the bone.
3, 2, 1.
So here I've got a large white Duroc cross from Suffolk, some beautiful free-range pork, and we're going to start off by taking the shoulders, the middle and the leg apart, just to break it into primals initially. So to do that, I'm going to need my saw and my steak knife. So I'm going to be taking the shoulder off 4 bones down, and I'm going to be cutting between the 4th and the 5th bone. I'm just going to cut a straight line through the bone. As I'm cutting, I'm trying to make sure that I don't cut through the bone straight into the meat with the saw, because this will lead to slashing on the meat, which when you later cooking will lead to burnt pieces. Once I'm through the bone, I'm going to take my steak knife and cut down and straight, removing the shoulder. Just put that to one side for now. So you've got the loin, which meets the chump and then meets the leg. So I want to leave the chump on the loin with the rest of the middle. So I'm going to cut just below the H-bone, about a thumb down. I'm cutting at a slight angle, and I'll show you why in a little bit. Put the middle to one side for now. So where I've cut that leg at the angle, my goal is to have a completely flat bottom, so when I can stand it up and it stands straight. The only other thing I'm going to do with the leg for now is just take the trotter off just below the joint here. The next thing I'm going to do, I'm going to bring my shoulder back, and I want to split my shoulder from my hand. Now, with the shoulder, you have a plate bone on top, and then underneath here you have a joint where your blade bone meets your straight marrow bone connecting to the hand of pork. And my aim is to cut through that joint. The first thing I want to do is just saw through the ribs on the top. So what I'm looking for when I'm sawing is just that hearing of the sound when it gets through the bone. I don't want to go too far with that because, like I said earlier, I don't want to slash the meat. Next, I'm going to need my boning knife, and what I'm looking to do is find the joint. So if you look, you can see where these muscles and the sinews are going. They're meeting over the top of the joint. There's always going to be a layer of fat there. I just want to open that up just to help myself see what I'm doing. So once I've opened it up, I'm looking for this little ball joint there. Just at the tip of my knife, I'm going to go down with the knife facing away from me and push, and that breaks the cartilage at the top of the joint, and then bring it back towards me, cutting in a straight line just around that ball. Pull all the way through. So once you've separated, you see you've got the ball on the side of the hand, and you see you've got the cap which leads to your blade bone on the shoulder. And we'll look at these cuts a bit later. Next, we're going to split our loin from our belly. How I'm going to split the loin is, I'm going to base it on a straight line coming from here, and what I want to do, just cut into the top of this little diamond of fat here. So with my boning knife, I'm just going to mark a line there, and when you're cutting, as you come down the bottom of the belly, you're just going to come out just a little bit as you come around the chump. The next thing I'm going to do, as I've marked the line for the belly and cut through the bottom of the knife, is I'm just going to saw these bones at the top. Now, I want to use the whole of my saw. I'm not going to push down too much into the ribs because then the saw will jump back at me. I'm just listening for that sound just as it gets through the bone, and then I want to stop with the saw. Back to my boning knife, pulling towards me, cut straight through. And then hopefully should have a beautiful straight line on your loin of pork and a slight taper to the pork belly. And that is our side broken down into primals. And next we're going to look a little bit more in depth into the different cuts. We've got our belly, our shoulder, our hand, our loin, our leg and our trotter. Now the leg will go into gammons, the hand will be boned out for sausage meat, and the trotter will generally go to one of our restaurants used for gelatins or stocks. Today we're going to look at belly, our shoulder and our loin. So here we have our loin of pork, and the first cut I'm going to do is a French trim rack and then show you some T-bone chops. So the first thing I'm going to do is just to remove the flare fat from the inside. We'll keep that, render it down for lard. Next, I'm going to separate the rack from the rest of the loin, and we're going to focus on that first. So the rack generally is 10 ribs long, so just at the end of the bottom rib, I'm going to cut straight down. Then with my saw, just separate it. This is the T-bone. I'm going to put that to one side for now and we'll look at that later. When French trimming a rack, there's two things you need to do. Take the chine bone off at the bottom and French trim the bones at the top. I like to start with the bones at the top first. For that I need my boning knife. I'm going to cut a line straight down about 2 inches on top here. I'll be careful not to cut into the eye of the meat. I'm going to keep it straight going all the way along, matching the line at the top. Go all the way down until you feel those bones, and you want to go between them if you can. Then lift the meat up. I'm just going to scrape against the rib bones to that previous line I've just cut. So I'm just taking that top cap of meat off now. And as I pull away, it should come away like that. And I'll put that to one side. This will go for sausage meat. Now once I've trimmed the bones back, the first thing I like to do is scrape this membrane from the top. There's a reason for this which we'll come to later. And what you want to do, with the boning knife, I'm going to scrape down until you get that bone right opened up for you. And this will make your life a lot easier. Now when I've separated that membrane from the top, there's a couple of little tricks I like to do. Firstly, I'm going to just mark my line by going through each bone from the top. Now once I've gone through there, I'm going to turn the loin on its back. And what that has allowed me to do is just give me the line on the inside. Now if you notice, there's a membrane on the inside of the bone as well. So what I want to do, I just want to make sure that membrane's cut along that same line. And what that helps me do, when I move the loin back, is just push this meat down. And because I've scraped that membrane away earlier, that allows me to get it off nice and easily rather than cutting and scraping each individual bone. So if I've done my job right, hopefully most of this meat should pull away together, leaving you with minimal scraping you've got to do on the bones afterwards. Again, none of that's wasted, that's all going to go into sausage meat as well. We're just going to scrape off the last little bits of meat on those bones, working our way down, getting every little piece off. Then once we've done that, we're going to look at taking off the chine bone off the bottom. The chine bone is essentially the spine bone that runs down the bottom. First, we're going to cut down this flat plate, and then we're going to saw these ribs. And what that will let us do is cut nice French trim pork cutlets. I'm just going to sit it on the edge of my board, just gives me a good angle to cut down on the flat part of the chine bone. So with my knife held like a dagger, I'm just going to go, and my knife is scraping against the bone. Loosen as we go. Go from one end all the way to the other. And it just lets you see where you're going as you work down. And then we're going to move it back onto its back, and then I'm just going to saw down these ribs. Got a little bit of tenderloin meat left there. I want to scoop that out, and that will go into the sausage trim as well. Just take that off the top. Now just get my saw. Now the same when we're cutting, breaking down the side, we want to just saw through the bone. We do not want to go into the meat. And I'm aiming just for that corner. I don't want to go too fast, just gentle. And as I go, I'm angling my saw just so I'm hitting the right bones at the right time. The worst thing I can do is cut into the eye of the meat. Just going to gently cut down. Even, sometimes I might pull the bones apart just because I really don't want to get into that eye. And once I know they're split, I'm going to use my boning knife. Now what I want to do, I just want to come down into the chine bone and match up where I've been cutting against the back. And eventually, and I'm pulling that bone away, letting the weight of the bone show me where I want to go. Eventually it should just come off. Like that. And the bone isn't wasted either. We sell those to restaurants and they use them for stocks and soups and anything they need. The next thing I want to do, I just want to give it a little face there just to make it look a little bit cleaner. Just with my steak knife, cut all the way along and just square it off. Another bit of fat going for the sausages. So that's our French trim loin of pork. But next I'm going to score it and tie it and cut you some cutlets. Now to score a loin of pork you need a good sharp knife. And most butchers and most people's kitchen knives aren't really up for it. So what we like to use is a Stanley knife. Now when you're scoring, a lot of people will talk about doing diamond scores and stuff like that. I do not recommend it. Ideally you want to go straight lines and not too deep. You're just cutting through the top of the skin into the fat. You don't want to slash into the meat. You just want to go all the way along. Probably about a centimetre to half a centimetre thickness. Now by going in a straight line, when you come to tie the joint, what that will do, that will help open up the cuts you've made, which lets the fat come out and render and crisp up that skin nicely. There we go. And next I'm going to tie the joint. Now to tie the joint, I'm going to tie between each bone. And I'm going to go from the thickest point down to the thinnest. Now what I'm going to tie is a butcher's knot, it's a slip knot. And you have your feeding string coming from underneath. Just hold that with my two fingers. Your top string, I'm just going to hook on my bottom fingers and then twist around. Literally all I'm doing. As I do that, I grab the end and pull through, and I just pull that tight. And then with your feeder string, I'm just going to gently pull that tight around the joint. Push the knot down, and then just to seal it, make another loop and pull the end through. And then my next piece of string would actually go almost a double space down. And do the same, loop round, tight, tight, and cut your knot. Now what I'm doing here is, my goal is to move this muscle down to create an equal joint. So by doing the double space and then going back on myself, I'm just forming the muscle into an equal joint for roasting. Once you've filled in that space, you can just go the next one along, and you can carry that on all the way down the joint. That's our French trim rack, nicely tied, ready for roasting. What I'm also going to show you is how to cut cutlets, which now you've done all this is very, very easy. Just simply going to face off the front first, and from the middle loins, just take some nice cutlets for you. So not only do you have like a beautiful roasting joint, you have some cutlet chops ready for the pan. Obviously I wouldn't normally tie it to cut cutlets from it. I just wanted to show you as much as I can. So don't worry about these bits of string, you can just take them off. Let me clean these away, and next we're going to look at our pork T-bone chops. So here we have the other end of our loin of pork. Now I've got two cuts here. I've got the pork chump and I've got the T-bone. First thing I want to do is take off the pork chump. It's fairly simple to do. You feel this nice dip, and that's where the chump and the loin meet. Now with my steak knife, I'm just going to cut straight down through the meat, and then I want to saw the bone. And there you can see why we call it a T-bone. We've got a tenderloin there, a loin, and this nice bone that forms a T at the bottom. With our chump, we'll use that probably for sausage meat. You can use it for steaks and a roasting joint as well. Now with the loin, what we want to do, we want to cut nice inch thick chops out of that. So what I'm going to do is tenderloin down, so I've got a firm grip on it, is just cut through the loin first. Just until I hit that bone, at which point I would then use my saw. As soon as I've got through the bone, using my knife. That's going to leave me with a lovely T-bone chop. So I've got the best of both worlds there. You've got the tenderloin, the loin, and this beautiful fat along the back. So that's the breakdown of our loin of pork into French trim cutlets and T-bone chops. And next we're going to look at our pork belly. So here we have our pork belly, and there's a couple of various different cuts you can do with it. You could bone it out and roll it. You could use it for bacon, which is lovely. What I'm going to do, I'm going to cut it in half, show you some pork belly slices, and also show you some meaty pork ribs for the barbecue. The first thing I want to do is remove this inner flare fat. This is a fat that you can render down for lard. Just with the tip of my boning knife, I'm just going to come along the top of it. I don't want to go too deep. And once I've done that, all I'm going to do is get hold of it, and then it's a good hard pull. And I'll put that to one side. Next, I'm going to remove this muscle here. Now you can leave this on if you're roasting the belly as whole, but we don't really need it for what we're doing. And that'll end up in sausage meat as well. So now we can actually see where our ribs are on our pork belly. You've got the straight rib bones there leading onto the cartilage. With this top piece, I'm going to cut that for meaty pork ribs, and then I'm just going to show you some pork belly slices as well. With my steak knife, I'm just going to cut through the bone, cut in a straight line. I might have to push to cut through the cartilage. First thing I'm going to show you is the meaty pork ribs. Now, meaty pork ribs will always come from the rib end. Got nice heavy meat. Sometimes they're called Chinese spare ribs as well. The first thing I want to do is square off this little cartilage piece here. Now your knife should go for that soft bone. The next thing I'm going to do is just take off this outer layer of fat. You should find a nice seam just on the top of the meaty end. So it's a fairly simple one. That's your meaty pork ribs. What we've got there is we've got nice fatty skin left. Can use that for some crackling or skim the fat off for sausage meat. Your meaty pork ribs are a beautiful cut for the barbecue. Marinated and smoked, they should be lovely and tender. The other cut I would like to quickly show you is just some pork belly slices. Nice and simple. Just going to cut about 1.5 inches thick between the bones in a nice straight line. I'm not going to cut all the way down to the end, because as you get lower down it gets a bit too fatty, and this will go for sausage meat as well. So that's our pork belly slice. I've cut mine a bit thick, that's how I like them, but they're very good for braising. You can roast them as well. So there's my meaty pork ribs and pork belly slices, just 2 cuts from this really versatile bit of meat. And next we're going to be looking at shoulder. So I've got 2 pork shoulders to look at because I want to show you a few different cuts. First we're going to look at a boned and rolled pork shoulder. I'm just going to put this one out of the way for now. So with the pork shoulder, there's a couple of different sets of bones to look at. We've got the vertebrae bone, which we're going to take out first, and then we've got the blade bone that sits in the middle. So we're going to put it skin side down. Just going to get my boning knife. The first thing I'm going to do is cut along the inside of this plate bone here. Just got to be very careful, try and stay under the bone and not push through. Just loosen that all the way along. And as you do, just scraping at the bone with your blade. And always move the meat around to suit you. So what I'm trying to do is just loosen the meat around one side of the inner side of the vertebrae bone. And then once I've done that, I'm going to work on the other side. So over here, the bone is slightly different. You're going to have a flat rib and then some meat here, which you want to cut away first. Just the tip of your knife following the line of the bone as you go down. Once I've loosened that point, I'm going to work on this flat plate bone, which is just to very simply hold the joint and with your knife cut against the bone, following it round. So I'm just following that bone around and I'm trying to meet where I cut on the other side. And you see, once it's loose, it just pulls away like that. Using the weight of the meat and the bone, pulling away, I'm just going to cut down this last bit on the inside. Always pulling that bone away to let me see what I'm doing. And once I've cut it away, I'm just going to put that to one side. The next bone I'm going to look at is my blade bone. Blade bone starts here, where you met with the joint. Now at the top, it's a flat bone, and the bottom has a bone that comes round, which we need to cut round. So to start off with, I'm going to, just using the tip of my knife, work from the top of the bone, cutting through the meat and scraping along the top. So just tip of the knife's going to scrape all the way down that bone, just opening that meat out. It just lets me see what I'm going. So where I'm cutting, I'm just scraping along the top of that blade bone, and it just allows me to see the edges so I know where I'm going to cut next. And once I've opened that right out, I'm then going to, just with the tip of my knife, run down the sides of the bone, just to loosen it up a bit more. Just cut away some trim there out of my way. The next bit is to take the bone off from the bottom. Now this is the more difficult piece because the bone's going to come in, drop down and then go up again. And I don't want to lose any of that meat. So to start off with, I'm just going to loosen around the top of the bone. And then pulling the meat away as much as I can with the tip of my knife, just scrape against the inside of the bone. Always making sure to pull the meat away so I can see where I'm going. Once I've done one side, I'm going to work on the other. This side's going to be a little bit more difficult, so going from the top, just the edge of your knife, you're just going to scrape down the bone. Always pull the meat away from the bone, helps you to see where you're going. And if you've done things right, as you pull away, it should really open up for you. And the last little bit is just to cut around the top of that bone there. And then once you've got that off, just if you've got any trim left on there, just trim it off and we can use that for sausages. And the bone can go for stock. And that's our boneless shoulder. Next thing we're going to do is tie it to a nice tight roasting joint. What I like to do is square it up. Just allows you to keep the shape better later on in the process. The first thing we're going to do is just take a nice straight trim line off there, just to take off these little last bits of bone. Don't need to take too much. Just want to straighten up that edge. We'll trim that up later as well. And then on the other side, I'm just going to cut that square to the first cut I've made. A little bit of bone left there, we'll trim that out as well. Now before we roll this, we want to score the skin as well. So just cutting about centimetre, half centimetre apart. Don't cut too deep. We don't want to slash the meat, we just want to open up that skin to the fat. So once I've finished scoring the skin, I'm going to turn it skin side down to roll it. I like to do that because what it does, it lets me see the muscles which I need to try and keep in place as I'm rolling the joint. There's more than one muscle in the shoulder and they will move around as you tie it. So with my first string, what I want to do is tie it around the thickest point of the shoulder, which will be in the middle around where all these muscles meet, and I want to try and keep that tight. I'm just going to do my butcher's knot. So the feeding string held by the bottom two fingers, top string, I just loop round and pull through. And then pull tight, push. And then just tie off the end. The next string I'm going to tie, I'm going to do a double space heading towards the thinner end of the joint. want to pull that nice and tight, just keeping those muscles in place. And then I'm going to go back on myself, just pushing the muscle down as I go. So by tying the joint like that, what I'm doing is I'm controlling this muscle. That's to try and give me a nice even piece of meat. So as I turn it over, just going to check I've got nice straight strings. I'm not always perfect at this. I just want to face up the ends to give myself a nice square joint. As always, nothing's going to waste. I just want a pretty joint. Now the test is, can I cut this in half and keep it all together? So the idea of tying it is to try and keep it nice and neat. So when you're cooking it, you keep a nice shape to it, so when you slice it, it looks good on the plate. Next, we're going to look at our other shoulder and do a few different cuts. And with the other shoulder, I want to show you how to take the pork butt off, which is the blade bone, which can be used for pulled pork. And I'm going to cut some shoulder chops. So to separate our two cuts, I'm going to cut in the middle of this bit of meat here, just coming underneath the blade bone and taking that top off. So using my steak knife, I'm just going to come in. So I'm just cutting along a seam that runs just underneath where the blade bone sits. So following that seam along the length of the shoulder, and just as I come towards the end, my knife is going to angle up and just take that blade straight off. So once I've cut through, the blade should come off, leaving you a nice layer of meat on the bottom. Now with this, you just square it up again. Just want to make it look nice. Now this would be perfect for pulled pork, roast blade, any of those slow cooked cuts. Next we're going to look at our pork shoulder chops. So what we have here is the pork neck fillet, but it's still on the bone. So the first thing I need to do is just remove this rind. I still want to leave that nice fat on there though. Just with your boning knife, you're just going to catch one end, scrape against the rind, go all the way along. You're just pulling the rind away as you go, scraping against it. Once you've got that rind off, you're just going to look at your shoulder, see if there's any little bits of bone there you don't want. You're just going to trim them up. Any bits of fat you don't want on there, make it look nice. And then we're going to cut our chops. Now, the first few chops are nice and easy to space out. You're going to go between the bones. And then once you get past that point, you're just going to work out roughly the same thickness and cut all the way down. Now with your steak knife, cut down, pull all the way along. Keeping a nice even spacing as you go down. So if you're going to cook all these together, they cook evenly. And leave you with nice portions. Now I've cut the meat, I'm going to use my saw to cut the bone. So there's my shoulder chops. It could be a beautiful cut for braising, marinating, or even barbecuing as well. So that's just some of the cuts you can get from the pork shoulder. Got a rolled shoulder, pork blade or butt, and some neck chops. So there we go. We've broken a side of pork down into primals and then shown you what you can do with a belly, loin and a shoulder. If you've liked this series and would like to see more, please click the link.